Hey, welcome back everyone. So today I want to talk to you about traveling during COVID. And as you may have seen from some of my previous videos, I've traveled a lot over the last couple months, and it seems like everywhere I go, I have major COVID issues. The countries get shut down, they declare a state of emergency, they go into the red zone, whatever that means. The world basically turns against them and shuts down borders and stops flights in and out of the area. They change the rules for me to get back to Canada. All sorts of crazy stuff happens whenever I travel due to COVID. So I want to talk through that with you. If you're planning to travel anytime soon, I think you need to be aware of some of these things so that you can have a better experience and not get stuck in a destination or have some other details that mess you up your holiday. So here's some of the things that I recommend you take a look at. First, you probably want to do some initial preparations for your trip. That would include COVID specific things on top of everything else that you would normally do. For me, of course, it was vaccinations. I'm in Canada, so for me it was a Pfizer vaccination. They gave me a provincial stamp that I can use for travel. Doesn't work very well. When I go to Europe, they try to scan my barcode that's Canadian. It doesn't work on their barcode because it's not an EU stamp, which is what they're looking for. And they just say to me, "Oh, sorry, it doesn't work." And then I have to explain to them that I got into the country as a Canadian with this barcode. It's Canadian, it's legit, and then I have to show them my passport and things like that. So if you're not from the EU and you're traveling in Europe, if you're maybe American or Canadian or Australian or whatever it may be, then you may need to make sure that you've got those documents and details and you're able to explain that to them, because I guarantee that's what's going to happen. But get your vaccinations, get your proof of vaccination, right? So that's probably going to be a barcode or some sort of email with official language around it that shows not only what you were vaccinated with, but when those vaccinations occur. And I'm sure sometime in the future, you're going to be requested to have a booster shot as well. So pay attention to that for the country that you're going to go to. Some of the new rules that I've ran into is the negative COVID test. And usually that's got to be a PCR test in a lot of countries. Not only to travel, to return to your country of origin, but also just to go into some places that you want, or events that you want to go see, maybe a concert or something like that, you may need to get a negative PCR COVID test. So what I would recommend is look at the places where you can get that done within the country that you're visiting and see what it costs. So there's usually a free option for residents, and take a look and see if as a tourist you're able to take advantage of that and what that looks like. There's also usually paid options, and figure out where those are. If you're going to a country that doesn't speak English as a primary language, that can be very tricky. When I was in Riga, Latvia, for me it was very challenging because they changed the rules about 36 hours before I was supposed to leave. So I was in a panic to get that 24-hour window of COVID testing done, and so I rushed around trying to find a place, and there wasn't a lot of English for me. It was extremely difficult for me to figure that out. I finally got it figured out at the airport, and so I went there and registered, got my test done, and they said, well, you're lucky that you got it done here because nowhere else would have been able to do it in time for you. So that was great. Actually, it was not great thinking back on it because they never sent me my results. Actually, both places, both Vienna and Riga, I had problems getting my results for my flight out. So it was total panic, and this could happen to you. So I want to tell you how to deal with that. So in the case of Riga, I went to the airport, I went to them and I said, hey, I didn't get my results. They spent about a half an hour trying to figure it out and totally disorganized. And then finally they found my results, which was good, which allowed me to get on the plane. I had booked, because I had a stopover in Frankfurt, I had booked a backup plan to get tested in Frankfurt. But I don't think they would have let me on the plane to get to Frankfurt, even with that backup plan to get to Canada. So it's really important to get your negative test before you get on the flight from wherever you're leaving. Even if you do have a stopover somewhere like Frankfurt or wherever, where you can get rapid testing within 30 minutes. So I'm really glad I got that figured out. In Vienna, I had a lot of testing done, which was good. They have a very good system there. So I think that's probably one of the better places in the world to get COVID testing done. I had a rapid 4-hour test done several times, which I had to spend money on, but it was very good, very fast, and I got the results right away, except for the day before I had to leave. So we were out having dinner with some friends. Everybody was getting their test results by email, showing me that they were negative. We were all happy, except for me. I never got my results. So as the night went on, I started to panic more and more. Luckily, they had a helpline that was open 24/7. So I sent them an email actually initially saying, hey, I don't have my results. Got nothing back. So now I'm getting more and more nervous. So then I phoned them and I said, hey, where are my results? I'm leaving in the morning. I need my results to get out of the country. And they said, oh, that's weird. And they looked it up and they went, oh yeah, your email was written down wrong. Even though I was already registered with them, even though I had done tests almost every day that I was there with the same company, they had my email wrong. So they fixed it and I got the test results, which were negative, within minutes. But that just goes to show you that you really need to be careful with this, because if you don't have your test results, you can't get home. And that could be really bad for you. Not only do you have to go back and find a hotel room for a while until you get the next flight out, which there's not a lot of now due to COVID, but then you have to book a new flight, and that could cost you a lot of money, a lot of inconvenience. So really make sure that you've got that dialed in, that you've got some test results. Maybe even if it's affordable, get 2 test results, just in case you don't get one of them. And so yeah, be careful with that. It's bitten me twice now. So now I'm very careful with that. The other thing you need to do before you leave home is get some good health insurance. There's a lot of options out there. You may already have some for travel, but if you don't, you need to go out and find a provider and buy that health insurance. I was never asked for proof of health insurance, but I think as we move forward, that may become more and more of a requirement. I did read somewhere that it is required by somewhere. It was either the hotel or the airline or the government. I can't remember where it was, but it did kind of make me think like, yeah, that's a good idea. I actually have multiple different health insurance on my credit cards and my employer, and then I bought my own health insurance just to make sure I was fully covered. Probably a little bit of overkill there, but the last thing I want to do is be in a foreign country with poor health care and not money to spend to get a little bit better attention. So I was really focused on that. It was relatively cheap. I think I spent under $100 on it. The other thing to look at, and this is overlooked by pretty much everybody, is what type of masks do they mandate in the country that you're going to? So for me, this was a huge surprise for me. I thought that the surgical masks, the N95s that we use in North America, were globally used and globally accepted. However, not the case actually. When I went to Vienna, I went to buy a SIM card at a store. I was wearing my mask, and the owner of the store said, oh, you can't wear that here. And I thought he was just trying to trick me in order to sell me one of the masks that he had, which looked kind of weird. But it wasn't a trick. It actually was true. And later on, my hotel even gave me some masks that were very different than the ones we use here. And I forget the name of them, but you can look it up. But I recommend that you take a look at the country you're going to and look at what kind of masks they recommend, because you probably want to pick some of those up before you go if you can. Otherwise, when you get there, then pick some up. You can probably get them from a drugstore or a pharmacy, or even maybe your hotel. My hotel was great. I stay at the Marriott. I love staying there. I get a lot of points and free stays there as a result. And so they gave me some free masks, which is great. Thank you very much, Marriott, for that. The other thing that you probably want to look at besides masks is just general supplies for COVID. So for me, I was sick actually right after coming back from Riga. I had a really bad flu. I think I got it on the plane. It wasn't COVID. I thought it was. But then when I went to Vienna, I was still kind of recovering from that. And I think the plane ride actually made it worse. So when I arrived in Vienna, I had a stuffy nose. I wasn't sleeping well. And I just didn't feel great. So I had to go to the drugstore and pick up some supplies. And the supplies I found weren't the same as what I get back home. I prefer the ones that I have here in Canada. So looking back, what I should have done is taken more supplies with me as far as medical supplies, medicines, and things like that. So what I'd recommend you think about is pain relief. So maybe some Tylenol, aspirin, whatever your pain relief of choice is. Maybe some hand sanitizer. You can't take very much on the plane, but a little bit would be good. Maybe some sterile gloves, those latex gloves, maybe if you want those. Some hand wipes, I always take those. I think those are great. Maybe some sinus medication, which would have helped me. And maybe some Kleenex as well. Little packages of Kleenex are really good for travel. The other thing that I ended up doing in Vienna was reaching out to some local doctors just because I thought I might have a bit of a sinus infection. So it was a bit of a job to figure out which doctors spoke English And I spent a good couple hours researching that and reaching out to them. I never did go visit them because things got better for me. However, I think this may be a good thing for you to look into to see if there's some local doctors there that speak English wherever you're going, and who would you go see, right? And what's their availability? If you're worried about getting COVID or getting sick, that's actually a really good thing to have in your back pocket, is to know, okay, that's the doctor over there at that address or that email address or that phone number, how I can reach them, and just know what that looks like. Are there any doctors in that region? Do you have to travel perhaps? So just getting a better understanding of that may not be a bad idea. And also, one of the things that has really helped me is to have friends in the area that you're visiting. So if you know somebody there, that's a huge asset, right? You can phone them or talk to them and say, hey, where should I go to pick up some pain relief medicine? Hey, where should I go to get COVID testing? Hey, where should I go to see a doctor? Right? They're going to know all of that, and that can be extremely helpful for you. So if you know anybody in the region, then make sure that you're going to tell them that, hey, I'm going to come visit. Maybe it's just an acquaintance, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a friend of a friend. Anybody that you can reach out to that lives there is going to be a huge help to you. All right, we've got all our stuff together. We're prepared to go. Now we're ready to start booking our flights and our hotels. And when you're doing that, what I recommend is take a look at what are the cancellation options there. Because for me, everywhere I go seems to go red. They seem to have an emergency, COVID takes over, and things change very dynamically. So for me, having the ability to cancel my vacation or maybe come home early is a really good option. And I think it's a really realistic option for most of you, more so than ever before. So I think many of us have been burned. When COVID first started, we had all of our travel booked, and then it was all canceled. So some of us lost money, some of us got points for travel that we could then use later, but it was just a bad situation. So to avoid that again, take a look at your options there. And before you buy, think about, how am I buying this flight? How am I getting this hotel? What credit card are you going to use? Most of us will use credit cards for that. Some of them have better cancellation policies and insurance than others. Some of them are specifically designed for travel. And so take a look at that. And I think it's best to know which one has the best options for you, because the chance of cancellation is pretty high these days. So make sure you got that figured out. Also, what you may want to look at is, what's the type of ticket that you're buying? So for me, I usually buy Air Canada wherever I can. I'm a frequent flyer with them. So I'm always looking at, okay, so I'm going to go over there. The COVID risk, I think, is about this much. Should I buy just a regular ticket, which is cheaper, or should I buy one with those cancellation options, which is a bit more, sometimes a lot more? So I think it's worthwhile thinking about that rather than just always buying the cheapest one, because your flight could very well be canceled. In fact, I spoke to people at the airport who were telling me that a lot more flights these days are canceled than ever before, just due to the lack of flights and planes that are in the air right now. So definitely worth thinking about. Also, when you're picking an airline, take a look at their policy. Not all airlines are equal in regards to cancellation policy. Some are better than others. So if you don't care about your points with a specific airline, take a look at their cancellation policy. What happens if you have to cancel due to COVID? Then maybe you get points, maybe it's a total loss, right? You want to take a look at that and see what best suits you. When you're booking your flight, one of the things I always look at is layovers. Coming from Canada, if I'm going to Europe or Asia, I'm always going to have a layover. And so what I want to look at is not only where is that layover, but also how long is that layover for. And I know most people will think, well, I don't want to have a long layover because I don't want to be stuck in the airport for hours, right? The food is not great and it's just not a great experience. But with COVID, I would recommend that you extend that layover by a little bit. Typically, my rule of thumb was I always wanted my layovers to be at least an hour and a half. That was pre-COVID. Now I look at it, I really don't feel comfortable with an hour and a half. Now I want it to be at least 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours for my layover, just because of all the dynamics that are happening out there, the flight cancellations, the flight delays, all those things. I don't want to be stuck somewhere halfway to my destination. I've had that before and it's not fun. I would rather spend the extra hour in the airport getting a cup of coffee or whatever I want to do during that time, just to know that I'm going to get to my destination without any issues. All right, we got our flight figured out. Now let's take a look at the hotel. What's the hotel cancellation policy? What does that look like? Normally, they're really good. Normally, you can cancel your hotel up to 48 hours or 24 hours before arrival, which is great. However, take a look and make sure that is true for the hotel that you're staying at. Because again, your chance of cancellation is higher during COVID. So we want to be prepared for that. Also, take a look. Do they have free masks available for people? Do they have on-site COVID testing? That's a huge bonus because it can be very expensive. I was paying, $100 plus some areas to get tested. And if you have to get tested every couple of days to go to events and things like that and to get home, that adds up very quickly. Is it just you or are you traveling with your family? Maybe 4 people. 100 times 4 to get COVID testing, $400, right? That's a lot, especially if you have to do that more than once. So your highest expense for your COVID travel plans could be COVID testing. So if your hotel provides free testing, which some of them do, not many, but some, then that could be a huge benefit. It may be worth staying at the hotel just for that. The other thing I would look at in your hotel is how clean is it? How kind of COVID friendly is it? And I stayed at a bunch of different hotels over the last little while, and some of them were good, some of them were not so good as far as the cleanliness of the hotel. Have they taken precautions, right? Do they have a big buffet that everybody's sneezing and coughing on? That's probably not good. Do they make people wear a mask when they go into certain areas? Things like that I would take a look at. You can talk to the hotel staff about that. It may be even on their website, the different things that they're doing. Generally, I find all the hotels are doing a pretty good job of that. Some of the hotels I went to still had a buffet, but everybody was wearing a mask, but everybody was really respectful of being careful around the buffet. It was great food actually at that buffet. So I'm glad they had it, but I was a little bit cautious with that sort of thing. All right, now you've got your flight, you've got your hotel. Now let's take a look at the location. What's the location looking like? What's the chance that it's going to shut down? Ironically, I've been to 2 areas over the last couple months, and both of them shut down pretty much just as I was leaving, which was good timing, but it was also kind of hectic for me to get out of there, to get my testing done, and I knew that it was high risk in some areas, and so it was just a bit of a mess. It wasn't super relaxing, so if you're going on a vacation to relax, which most of us want to do, then I would recommend take a look at your destination and look at what does it look like so far. Are case numbers going up or are they going down? What's the death rate per population? Because if that's high, that kind of tells you that maybe their healthcare isn't very good. And you can probably figure that out fairly quickly. Is it a communist country where they don't have great healthcare? Or is it a country like in some parts of Europe which actually has great healthcare? So I would look at that and make your decision based off of that as well. Because if you get COVID, which hopefully you don't, you're going to be stuck there and you're going to want medical attention perhaps if you're in that kind of category. So that can get pretty scary pretty quickly if they don't have good medical care. The other thing I would look at for the region is, can you travel outside of the region by train or is it strictly air? Because I think traveling by train is a little bit more flexible, and I'm not sure if they require all the time the negative COVID test and things like that. So that may give you some flexibility. Also, what are the rules that they have in the country? So can you go to events? Are events even on? So for me, I like to go to some different events. I went to the opera in Vienna, which it's famous for, of course. I had to have my negative COVID test and also my vaccination records to get in. And so I think that was fine for me, but if every event is like that and you're going to a lot of events, that could be costly. I also like to go to the pub for a beer and the restaurant for dinner. So where I went, I just had to have my vaccination documentation to get in, and then it was fine. But in some places, those are all shutting down, so you can't go to the restaurant, you can't go to the pub. So how much fun is your holiday going to be if you can't actually go anywhere or do anything? And if case numbers are going up, it may be fine when you book your holiday, but it may turn bad once you get there, like it did for me, and they may close everything down. So I saw a lot of people in Vienna that were not quite ready to go home yet, but there was no real choice because everything was closed. So you don't want to run into that. So make sure you're looking at the trends for that region. I think the other thing is, what do you plan to do on your vacation? If it's a lot of outdoor activities, like maybe hiking, horseback riding, activities out in the ocean, maybe fishing or things like that, then your risk is much lower. But if you're going to do things inside, especially during the winter maybe, then it could be a little bit higher. And some of those places could be closed. So I think that's something to look at as well. Now, I think the big question here would be, what happens if you catch COVID? What happens if you test positive? And this was the big scare for both me and my friends that were on holiday, and we were thinking about, well, what happens? What do we do? And I think it really depends on the region that you're in. I think in Vienna, they had some great options where they had a hotel that you would go to, and I'm not sure what the cost was. Somebody told me that was free, but I would assume there's a cost. In most places there would be. So what happens if you get COVID? Does the hotel that you're staying at allow you to stay there? Do they have vacancy for another 2 weeks? Can you tell your job or your employer that you're not going to be coming home for 2 weeks? What happens if you don't come home for 2 weeks? Do you have kids waiting for you at home or business or things like that? So can you work from where you are if you do get COVID? What's your risk level, right? As well, if you do test positive for COVID, do you expect to have to go to the hospital? Are you maybe elderly? Do you have some underlying conditions that you're concerned about? Those are very valid things to be thinking about right now as you're traveling. So if you're a younger person with no health issues, then I would say your risk level is probably low. I'm no doctor. Don't quote me on that. I'm not giving you any sort of health or medical advice here. I'm just saying from the stuff on the internet, that seems to be the case. But if you're older and you do have health issues, then you definitely want to research your destination and take a look at, okay, how would they care for me if I do have complications? And finally, I think this is one of the more important things. What are the options for exit? You're on holiday, you're having a good time, like I was twice, and all of a sudden things go south. There's an emergency, COVID rates are going through the roof. In the case of Vienna, Austria, it was basically a vertical line going straight up, which looked scary on the graph. So everybody was trying to get out of Vienna, getting out of Austria, and flights were fine. The airport was super busy, of course, which is to be expected. But overall, big kudos to Austria. They do a great job of many things, and this was another example of that. I think it was fantastically organized. Testing was awesome. The airport was organized very well. Can't say enough good things about Austria or Vienna in particular. I think they do a great job of that. I've heard they have great health care. So I at no point did I feel at risk or too panicked getting out of there. But I think you should research where you're going and figure out, is that going to be the same or different? I think every place is going to be a bit different. What are your options for getting out? Can you get out by train, by car, by bus, by plane? Right? What does that look like for you? And what if you can't get out? What does that look like as well? What's that duration look like? What are your options? What's the COVID testing options that you have? Can you do it at the airport? Is there a lot of places in town? Some small towns may have no COVID testing, right? So organize your exit at the same time you're organizing your entry. I think that's really a necessity at this point in time with COVID. You have to be very well organized. Otherwise, as you're getting ready to end your holiday, you're going to be thinking about this and starting to panic, like I was probably, about, okay, how do I get home effectively? There's a lot of things that could go wrong, and I think one of those, probably the biggest risk factor, like I spoke about, is getting that negative COVID testing dialed in and finished and have proof of that you can show them quickly. I saw a lot of people at the airport struggling with that, and they were turned away, and they went to the express testing in the airport. Luckily it was there. Not every airport's going to have that, so that's another thing to check out. So my final recommendation for traveling during COVID, and this is what I like to do for on the plane to have a better time, is I make sure that I've got my own food on the plane, some snacks and stuff like that. I've found that the food on the plane since COVID has changed. It's not as good. Not that it ever was that good, but it's even worse now. So I have my own snacks that I can eat. I have my own masks that I can wear. I have some hand sanitizer. And really the biggest thing that I love to have on the plane is a little bottle of mouthwash, because it's very difficult to brush your teeth on the plane. And if you do eat the plane food, the airline food, which is terrible, it leaves this terrible taste in your mouth. So the mouthwash, not only is it going to disinfect my mouth, but it's also going to make my mouth taste more fresh. It's going to give me a much better experience on the plane. And I'm going to come off the plane feeling that much better. So that's what I recommend. My last little tip for you. So that's it. I hope you have a great holiday, a safe holiday, and I hope you're able to return back to your home country without any issues. If you've got any questions, if I missed anything that you'd like to recommend, please let me know in the comments down below. I'd really love to hear from you and what your experience has been like traveling during COVID. All right, that's it. Happy trails.